All right, thank you, sir. We're gonna, like you said, you're gonna take just a moment to get situated. Bio breaks are important. Uh, Staying hydrated is important as well. So make sure you do that. We got a certain amount of time allotted for us to do this, so we're looking forward to it. And for those who've come to hang out and stay with us a bit, we appreciate it. So, my new friend and colleague there, Charles, is right there, and it's going to be part of this overall discussion. I'm going to lead that, ask a few questions, throw some questions out there for myself, Charles, and Amir to address, and yeah, getting settled in. Right on. Do it, Ben. There he is, and Mir, the other fellow on the clock. I appreciate your time. Appreciate everybody being able to be here. And this is a big issue. So it's one of those things that we are going to lay out there, but also in the process of discussing who we are and what our experiences are, and professionally, what we've seen. What does that look like to help carry that? What does that look like to help others who are living this truth carry that? So yeah. All right. So we are back on deck, and let me make sure I have my pen here. I got it. All right. So in getting started this morning, I appreciate you all coming to this session today. As part of our Stop the Stigma conference, hosted by the community and Moxie, the educational services. At the Stop the Stigma at this here, we acknowledge the importance of people first language, and how that shapes and how we understand each other. First person language centers humanity over diagnosis or the system involvement and reflects our shared commitment to dignity, respect, and equity, which we appreciate. We recognize that individuals may prefer identity first language, and we encourage speakers and participants to honor the personal preference whenever possible. We also like to begin with a land acknowledgement because that's important as well. And although this conference is held virtually, we acknowledge the indigenous peoples whose land we occupy as we gather, as we learn, as we collaborate. The community is headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Myself, I am employed there, as well as Ben. So you can find us there. If you're ever in Wisconsin, please look us up, check us out. Make sure we can give you a good tour of the place. Here in Wisconsin, the traditional homelands of Ho Chunk Nation, man, good people, the Menominee Nation, and the Potawatomi Nation, with enduring ties to the Ojibwe and the Odawa, the peoples of the councils of the Three Fires. Uh, Moxie Educational Services is based in New Hampshire, which was new to me. I learned a lot about them over the last couple of weeks, which I appreciate. And the ancestral lands of the Amanaki, apologies for that butchering there, and the Pennacook peoples, whose histories, their culture, and sovereignty continues today. We honor their resiliency, their ongoing contributions to the community, to themselves, to the world, and the enduring relationships to the land. This acknowledgement is only the beginning, of course. We encourage all attendees to learn more about the indigenous nation whose lands we reside on and to support the ongoing efforts towards indigenous justice and sovereignty. So, with that, I want to make sure that everybody can hear me okay, because I had got a little message there in the chat that maybe I wasn't too clear enough. Okay. All right, good, good. Uh so on that note, I want to take a moment to introduce everybody to the three panelists. Officially, I am leading this conversation, but I am very much team player in this. I refer to, for those who don't know, Jordan was the best player to ever do it. So I like to refer to the way with which he played the game, which was brilliant. So I'm very much here and willing to share my experiences and what I've come to learn professionally as well. And I'm Carl, and like I said, I work with the community, formerly incarcerated person. I myself suffer from multiple things stemming from incarceration, as well as my willingness to do this work from a community organizer perspective. And so I appreciate that what that takes to do is something that all of us work towards. And so I'm also going to pass the mic to my two peers here, Charles and Mir. They can take a moment to introduce themselves so we can get started.
And don't forget virtual descriptions.
I'll go first. Hello, everybody. My name is Charles Rosario. I'm the program coordinator for the Emerson Prison Initiative, um, based out of Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts. Um, should I describe what I'm wearing? I'm wearing a burgundy fleece. I am a bald-headed Hispanic male, caramel complexion with a salt and pepper, pretty cool beard, I like to think. And yeah, and I come to this work because I do consider myself somebody who has been at the intersection of race and disability for a while and didn't really even know it until recently. And I do thank Beth and Ben for actually helping me kind of look at my disabilities in a different way. I almost sort of stigmatize myself in a way, if that makes any sense. But I feel like this is important work that needs to be done, and it's almost like an uncharted territory, right? And it's not a lot of work that's been done here because a lot of this work has been gone undiagnosed or unacknowledged for so long that, there's a lot of work that needs to be still done in this field. So I'm excited to be here and share about my life with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And Carl, it's a pleasure and an honor to be at this roundtable discussion with the both of you. My name is Mir Amini. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I serve as the program director for Project Rebound at California State University, Fullerton. We are located in Fullerton, California, which is located in Orange County, Southern California. I am also a formerly incarcerated person, having served 16 years in prison between the age of 18 and 34. I am also a person with a visible disability. I am paralyzed from the waist down. I use a wheelchair for mobility purposes. And I think it's important to note that I was in a wheelchair during the entirety of my incarceration. Physical description of myself. Like my fellow roundtable compatriots, I am also bald-headed. Maybe there's a link there between incarceration and bald heads. I'm not sure, but I'm wearing glasses. I have brown skin. I am first generation Afghan American. I was born in Afghanistan, immigrated to the United States at the age of 2 as a refugee, and I would say, I think yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm wearing a sweater vest, a red tie, and a burgundy shirt, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here today.
Thank you for that, fellas. I certainly get a kick out of that. I am definitely in the ball-headed club. And and my particular description, of course, is that I am brown skin, African American male, and I am 78 inches for those who know what that means. I am 6'6", and I have to, as a black man, address people differently every single time because the average person is much shorter than me. And so when I talk about being with a disability, that is just not something that is initially received, and it certainly is even either laughed at or sometimes scoffed at. And so I really have to, years past that is, I had to adjust myself to be able to address that with care and with compassion and not personalize the fact that someone just laughed at at me and my struggle. And so yeah, that being a real thing, no doubt. I certainly appreciate that description as well, Charles. The beard is exactly what you said it is. Um, you come to Wisconsin, make sure I'll be sure to bring you to one of the best barbershops to get hooked up. And so let me throw a few questions out there because we got a couple and we want to cover as much material as possible. I certainly want to be able to uh paint some clear pictures for some people, so I want to use as much time as possible. First question that I pose for the crew here is what do you think about the justice system? Where do you see race and disability intersecting most visibly? And where do you see them invisibly? Of course, some of the examples were, policing, courts, education, healthcare, etc. But yeah, what do you think about that at first glance, Charles? Mir, reach out there and grab that.
Unmute myself. Um, I just think that for a lot of black and brown folks, there's an extra layer of having to figure out whether it's safe for you to disclose your disabilities. Um, Mainly because so much of how these disabilities play out or get carried out or are exemplified, the behaviors of them, what the symptoms of them, if you will, often those are criminalized in many ways. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. So I feel like it becomes a strategic decision whether somebody wants to disclose or not. So I think that comes off visibly and invisibly, but I think it starts invisibly. I think it starts internally inside a person's head and it kind of reinforces negative stereotypes, negative um internalized feelings about themselves. And so invisibly, I think it starts there, and I think it's a really big handicap for pardon the pun.
In- Indeed, indeed. Mir, what you think on?
Yeah, I think when we're looking at intersections between disability, race, and the justice system, we actually have to take it back and really look at our school system. We often cite and we often speak about the school to prison pipeline, and I would say the special education system, it's been weaponized against people of color. From a very young age, you realize that you are being labeled, that you are being looked at as different. For myself, as an English learner in elementary school, from a very young age, I would be pulled out of class and put into separate classes. And this actually occurred once I became fluent in English, right? I've been here since I was 2 years old. And so from a very young age, I'd be pulled out of class because I was labeled as an English learner, even though I spoke English just as good as my other classmates. And so having a visible disability, I feel that automatically education puts you under a magnifying glass to suggest that, well, if this person has a visible disability, are there any cognitive issues? Are there any learning disabilities? And so I remember for the majority of my school journey as a youth, it was a constant state of convincing school officials that I can keep up with my classmates even though I use a wheelchair. But I will definitely say that the seeds are sown very early on in the K through 12 system before many individuals even see the back of a police car or a jail cell.
Thank you for that, Mir. Certainly would echo that quite a bit. It starts early, and unfortunately, it turns into a bit of a conveyor belt system, where, like you said, a person begins to be put on a different track simply based on assumptions, inaccurate assumptions, and a lot of times those are racial in nature, and that is baked into the system. Unfortunately, I too went through that, and so I appreciate you lifting that up. I certainly notice how there are sometimes young people. I myself, probably for me, it didn't hit until maybe about third or fourth grade, where I began to reflect in my speech and in some of my actions that those choices that were beginning to be made for me. I began to internalize that early, and my parents noticed, but I was unfortunately, treated as if I was making these particular kinds of decisions when really as a young person, I was just responding to my K-12 experience. So yeah, no, I appreciate lifting it up for sure. Um, Second question, good one. Love the way it's been framed and talking about misinterpretation and criminalization, which, segues nicely. How are the behaviors related to disability, especially like you were saying, the cognitive, the psychiatric, deaf, neurodivergent disabilities? How are those misinterpreted through racial bias, both in policing and in the court settings as we scale up toward prison? Which is a loaded question, a complicated question, no doubt, no doubt. Take your time. I'll repeat if needed.
I can Charles, did you wanna go ahead first?
I could go after you.
So when I think of this question, I think of all those individuals within our community who use alternative modes of communication, our court systems, our prisons, who within the prisons and jails have their own court systems. You know, the disciplinary communities. They lack access to alternative communication for our deaf brothers and sisters, for our brothers and sisters who require Braille for legal work and so forth. And I think it's even more exacerbated between people of color and non-people of color because they have historically grown up to navigate these systems, to be able to advocate for themselves. Myself, I speak for myself, and hopefully this resonates with other individuals. I grew up in a household where it was not acceptable to be the squeaky wheel. It was not okay to bring attention to yourself. And so this carried over into adulthood and into my experience with the criminal legal system, where if things were not going your way or if you witnessed your rights being violated, you just kind of hunkered down and went along your way. You did not make a fuss about it. And I think it's cultural. I think it's embedded in our society here in the United States. But I have seen it firsthand.
Thank you, Mayor.
Right. I agree a lot with that. But I also want to take a look at how there are a lot of preconceived notions, biases, stereotypes already. Um, and a lot of these systems, internalizing in these systems where once somebody sees somebody maybe having a bad reaction to something due to their disability, I feel like their negative stereotypes get exacerbated, right? Um, it's almost taken as an affirmation of their stereotypes, and then that causes them to maybe hunker down more in their position, believe those negative stereotypes even more. For example, if somebody's having a behavioral symptom to their disability, I don't want to get too specific, but let's just say it's demonstrated in a physical way. Person may already have a notion that black or brown people are aggressive, violent. So they may already come into the situation, and we see this a lot with policing. They come into a situation thinking that it's violence, it's aggression, but really it's just a disability taking place. You know what I mean? And going into that, that becomes exacerbated because now, whether that situation gets handled well or not, that person that goes into that situation and sees that could come away feeling like their stereotypes or negative biases were affirmed. And he could, say, oh, they are violent. They are aggressive. Oh, a lot of these cop killings probably were warranted. You know what I mean? Like, and those things become super dangerous because it's like when you don't take account into what could possibly be going on, how do you know how to even assess the situation or how to even address the situation, right? So I feel like this happens a lot in the educational system, in the prison system, in courts, even in the medical field, it happens as well, where a person could be having a reaction to something, and here comes security to apprehend the person as if they were just acting out. So that's something that I feel definitely becomes more multiplied than just one plus one. It becomes like one times three, right? The negative effects of it.
Right, right. No, I appreciate that, Charles. And we certainly have a school to prison pipeline question coming up soon as well. And certainly want to both point that out and lean into the fact that there are people who work for schools. There are people who come from the social work background within schools. There are people in law enforcement within schools who are all trying to do the job they were hired for and find themselves within a system that is pressing back or pressing up against them and the ideals that brought them into that career choice in the first place. And so certainly want to acknowledge that I wouldn't be where I am today without there being teachers who were able to swim against the tide, law enforcement officials who were swimming against the tide, and in a pure sense living up to the ideals of both what DOC says it's about and what the rehabilitation methods that I were a part of were about. So, certainly want to acknowledge that. Um, Moving into a particular question that was touched on slightly earlier, but still makes sense to ask directly. That being, why might someone who is both disabled and a person of color hesitate to disclose that disability in the justice system? And what are the risks involved in that?
Well, I think the risk is somebody misunderstanding your disability, misinterpreting what is actually happening due to your disability, and you having to make a strategic decision about whether you want to take that risk, whether you can afford that risk or not. And then also the risks that come with being stigmatized or, labeled. I think, those there are a lot of considerations that come with that because you just don't want to put yourself many of us are already at a disadvantage, and acknowledging your disability could be even more disadvantageous as opposed to beneficial. You disclosing, it should be that you get more help and it should level the playing field a little bit, if you will, but it doesn't always happen like that. A lot of times, the disability just makes your conditions even worse for you. So,
Indeed. Indeed. No, I appreciate that answer. What you thinking, Mir?
Yeah, so I'm going to approach this from a different angle, and I don't know if individuals on the call realize how big the state of California really is, right? When we think about California, excuse me, when we think of big states, we think Alaska, Texas. California is a very long state, right? So when I have family visit, I live here in Southern California in Orange County, and they said, "Hey, can we drive up to San Francisco for dinner?" I'm like, "You do realize that's about 6 hours away, right?" California is not a small state. With that being said, California has one of the largest prison systems in the world. I believe at one time we had 35 prisons throughout the state. Our farthest prison is up by the Oregon border, Pelican Bay State Prison. Our most southern prison, I want to say Centinela State Prison, which is at the 8 miles from the Mexican border. And you could be placed at any one of those prisons. And unfortunately, in the state of California, if you have a certain type of disability, so if you have a mobility disability, if you require a wheelchair, a walker, there are only certain prisons you can go to, you can be placed in. Certain prisons are equipped to meet the needs or supposedly meet the needs of people with mobility disabilities. So, I'll speak from my experience. I was in a prison up in Lassen County, which is by the Nevada border in Reno, Reno, Nevada. It was approximately 10 hours from where I was living. I tried convincing the doctors that I no longer needed a wheelchair. Mind you, I am paralyzed, but I wanted to get out of the classification of being labeled as a person who needed a wheelchair because High Desert State Prison was a prison that accommodated people with wheelchairs, but I was trying to transfer to get closer to home, to go down south. So for me, it was the opposite. It was trying to convince prison officials that I did not need the medical treatment or the medical accommodations they were trying to give me simply because I was trying to get transferred closer to my family. Unfortunately, this is the reality for a lot of people. There are only certain prisons that can accommodate deaf incarcerated men and women, blind incarcerated men and women. And so by simply disclosing that you have a disability, you have now just narrowed down your the prisons that you can actually be housed in, and many times they're hundreds of miles away from your home or from your family.
No, indeed. No, thank you for that, Mir. That is, man. I guess that high speed rail option hasn't worked itself out yet in
Thank you for
California,
that,
huh?
Mir. Can I add to that, Carl? If
Go.
you don't mind. Also, something that you made me think about, Mir, also is opportunities and how many times I've run into this during my reentry work where guys are hesitant to disclose disabilities due to them feeling that it will limit their opportunities in employment, in housing. Um, and that's a real thing because housing, a lot of landlords try to avoid housing disabled residents due to the accommodations that they would have to make for them,
Spot
right?
on. Spot on.
That's and housing is already a huge issue for everybody re-entering, much more for black and brown folk who are trying to re-enter it and do that. And then you add on a disability, that makes your prospects seem very daunting, especially when you first come home. And then opportunities for jobs, for example. I know individuals who suffer from a lot of anxiety as a result of the incarceration and come home and want to explore CBD, medical marijuana. And for a lot of jobs, that's looked at as a negative. And there's certain jobs you can't get. There's certain things that once you apply for medical marijuana, it kind of puts you at a like on a limited on a list of jobs that you can't even get because of this disability or this you know relief that you're seeking for your disability. So those are other things as well to consider.
No, that is a great piece to highlight and point out. I appreciate that. Like you said, the fact is so many different pieces are used to screen out a person from being able to have the most basic of thing, which is a place to live. And I try to point out often in moments like this that um, over incarceration leads to the inability to do all the things that were just named. Where in the past, like in my state in Wisconsin, where we have almost 40 prisons, Mir, for a population of 20,000 plus people incarcerated. And so a few hundred people per prison, but it is a huge thing. Um, we have moved into a system where it is about where the bed space is available versus the services available. And so the prison system in and of itself begins to not do the thing that it was meant to do, which was provide services and rehabilitation and it ceases to be able to prioritize those things when we are 25-35% over capacity in our state, which is not uncommon at all, which, Charles Mill, Um, also, to point out that, I mean, and our school to prison pipeline conversation, of course, is coming. But in pointing out the fact that the system is very much a thing that is meant to do recovery, rehabilitation, deterrence, some of the things you just named, that's part of a bigger picture of, what's called public safety. And within public safety is less victims. Uh, did I lose you there? Oh, okay. Within the system of public safety is less victims is the focus. Um, uh, Less recidivism is the focus. A person coming home and doing well is the focus. Those things fall to the wayside when a person can't get needs met, and needs can't get met when stigma shows up in the ways that we're talking about. I myself had to hide my disability when I went to community custody minimum because as a person who was suffering from back issues and in need of surgery, they wouldn't let me go to work. But work release minimum is the only way you can be there is if you're working. So in fear of being kicked out, I hid my disability and said, I'm good enough. But I also knew that if I could just hang in there a few months long enough, then I could get to the release program that I was shooting for. And so I just suffered through my disability when there were easily situations in the prison and the job that could have accommodated it. But like you said, Charles, I was deadly afraid of not getting a solid opportunity and so I just live with it. And so that
Right,
that
right.
that bothers me that that had to be the case. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate you, Mir, shaping it in a rather roundabout way as you had. I'm gonna throw this question out here, and then I'm gonna go to the chat because we've got a few questions there as well. I've been able to see some of that, so I'm gonna go through that. But in talking about how does school to prison pipeline uniquely affect disabled students of color? Like, how does that really show up in a person's life through K-12?
Well, I could speak directly to that. So ADHD, for example, um, you know, hyperactivity often is uh misclassified as, you know, acting up. That's how it's described often in school. He's acting up. He's acting, but ADHD is just it's cognitive, right? Um, that's something that in school, that's where it really gets played out very early on in a child's life, right? And that could set them up for that trajectory of that prison pipeline because their curriculum and the classes where they could be put oftentimes are determined by, could be determined by their disability. An individual could be very intelligent, but just have learns differently. But he's going to be classified basically on his challenge of how to learn, and he's going to be placed in special ed in a certain way. And I feel like they don't really do a great job of helping people learn the way that they are, you know, I don't want to say designed to learn, but I feel like everybody has a different learning style. And school is just one way, one style, right? Everybody's together, everybody's in the same classroom, and just sitting next to somebody in close proximity or having somebody behind you, if you have a cognitive disability, that could be exacerbated just by the close proximity, but you'll be looked at as, oh, maladaptive, he can't adapt to the classroom, or he's having a hard time working with others. That may not be the case whatsoever, right? But that could set a child up for like every single year having to deal with the same, miscalculations and misassessments, and then it could just set them up for failure. And I think that when a child is in school, those are the most formative years, right? So that could set somebody up for like the rest of their life, really. Me personally, I suffer from ADHD and anxiety while I was going to school and didn't even really know it. I would underclassify myself as like that's not a disability. Like, I used to do that to myself and hide my own because I just didn't want the stigma. But there was a lot of challenges, and I actually ended up getting into a situation with one of my professors, and I felt it was because of a misunderstanding, and I actually was arrested on school grounds and taken to juvenile jail, right? So my school to prison pipeline is like literal. Um, and I felt criminalized by my school system rather than humanized, right? And that's a huge issue, and that just continued, and I internalized that. Because I was criminalized by a lot of the systems, I felt like if they're looking at me as a criminal, what I must be, right? And it became internalized, and it was very harmful to myself. So the school to prison pipeline is something that like disability definitely exacerbates a lot.
I'd also like to contribute to that, Charles. Thank you so much. And thank you for your transparency and just sharing your own lived experience. It's not easy. It's not easy speaking to trauma. Uh, Somewhere where I see a huge gap within the school to prison pipeline and how it affects disabled students of color is IEPs, IEP meetings, advocating for children with disabilities in the K through 12 system. Many communities of color, families of color, who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds simply don't have the time to advocate for their children who have disabilities, to attend IEP meetings, to take time off of work, to be able to go to these meetings. Speaking for myself, as a first generation American, my dad never had time to go to any of my school meetings for any reason. My mom, who did not know how to drive a vehicle, she, if she knew how to take the subway, I was living in New York City at the time, the subway or the bus to get to the school, she would try to make it. But then, even then, this is before the days of being able to provide an interpreter or translation services. And so I think there's a huge deficit there for communities of color and the extension of services towards students with disabilities. The second approach I would take to that also is the cultural stigma that exists in communities of color. I don't think there are many families out there, especially in cultures where disability is still stigmatized. It's looked at as a deficit, where they want to acknowledge that their child has a disability. The school might send a notice and say, "Hey, we'd like to meet with you." Concerning your child, they may have an undiagnosed disability. Parents will be resistant to it and say, "There's nothing wrong with my kid," and completely ignore it. And when you're 6, 7, 8 years old, you're caught up in between your family denying that you have a disability, but the school may be suggesting that they do. You're not going to get the services that you need to be successful in a classroom type setting. And as Charles spoke to, this now gets interpreted as disciplinary issues, maladaptive behavior, behavioral issues. And I think it's a huge contribution to why so many students of color get funneled into the criminal legal system from a very early age.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mir, Charles. No doubt. A lot of activity in the chat around these very issues, especially IEP, and that's real. That's one of the systems that, on its face and with its intention was meant to be powerful and important and be able to create a lane to educate young students with needs, because needs and wants are different things, and being fair and being and putting in a kid's life what they need are very different things sometimes, a lot of times. The other, of course, I wanted to highlight that it spoke about how the research that happens and the way that it happens comes from a white lens, and it's normed in a way that is based on a particular population, and it doesn't bring into account all of these other specifics that are needed for different populations, especially marginalized populations. Socioeconomic status is huge when we're talking about educating people, when we're talking about especially little people. And so I wanted to move right into a particular question, and I wanted to frame it based on like a media point of view, a media portrayal, and how the media portrays, crime to reinforce stigma and race within this category that we're talking about. What does that look like? How does that show up when we're talking about mistreating people? How does the media portrayal of crime and the stigmas that go along with it lead to various kinds of mistreatment? Whether that be in school, because we've talked about it with schools, or inside of prison. And because we're talking about disability, medical neglect. Go ahead, Charles. I'm gonna lob it to you. I see him resonating with you a little bit there. Go ahead.
With the medical neglect.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, it just follows along the same line, where, things are just misunderstood and misdiagnosed and misclassified. And you can see this much in the medical field. I don't have much experience with how you could see it play out in the medical field. And for me, I would say because for so long, right, I just didn't think I had a disability or didn't want to acknowledge it. So medically for me, I feel like I avoided the medical um system regarding how I felt I was disabled, right? And it wasn't until recently that I started to actually really advocate for myself in that way. Right now I'm seeing it play out. I'm getting my master's degree. So I've been asking for accommodations made here, and it's been not that smooth of a process because I'm not a traditional student and I'm also staff. So what I'm trying to classify as a disability for me kind of runs into the face of what my job is actually asking me to do. So it's kind of tricky for me in that way. Um, but medically though, I mean, I could imagine. I think Mir could probably speak more to this when he actually has like a real
Right.
physical disability that the medical field has been involved with him for a while. I think he'd probably be better to speak to this, but I
Right.
definitely could see how medically this also could be exacerbated just like every other system.
Indeed, indeed. I wanted to make sure that I lobbed it to you because I wanted to jump in here as well with my particular experience and then hand it off smoothly and nicely to Mir to let him wrap us up nicely. You know, the flagship member here of our panel.
Wow.
I do like Mir and I like the way he brings it. So certainly want to have him wrap us up nicely here. For me, this is one of those things where the stigma reinforced the pain and pain tolerance and the ability versus inability to feel pain. For
Right.
me, that showed up in my throughout my 16 years of incarceration. And when I began to try to get help and services through, through the medical arm, one of the things that I was told was that my pain threshold was high, my pain tolerance was high. And in other conversations, like in my medical file, I saw that um, my high pain threshold, which was totally inaccurate. It hurt like hell, the things that I was telling them about, was also attached to my ability to perceive certain things and be empathetic. And from my cognitive intervention programming that I taught when I was inside, that was tied to my lack of feeling, lack of empathy, lack of humanity. And so I was like, wow, there's a through line in all of this. And that was something that I discovered just, it's an academic point of view, but it's something that I saw playing out in real time in my life when I was in prison. And the fact of the matter is, in order for me to get assistance that I needed, I had to learn the medical terminology and I had to really sit with my issue so I could describe it accurately and then document it accordingly so that I could work it up the chain if I wasn't getting the help I received. And I had to learn, and I had years, of course, to do that and think about it. But that's what it took for me to get some basic medical necessities. So go ahead, Mir.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Carl and Charles, the both of you. I think you both add very valid points to this question of medical neglect of persons with disabilities, persons of color in the carceral system. Um, Medical neglect is rampant in any type of carceral system, uh, throughout not just throughout the United States, but throughout the world. We're labeled as criminals. We're labeled as people who violated rules and laws in society, and so we're thought of as less than. We're not, even if we're telling the truth regarding our pain levels, our disabilities, our medical needs. Where we're looked at as less than and undeserving of medical treatment. I've had several people, family members of mine, scoff at the idea that incarcerated folks should get put on organ donation lists, that they should get blood transfusions. Many people don't agree with the fact that if you are an incarcerated person, you're still entitled to medical treatment. I have personally encountered individuals like this. And just bringing it back to the medical neglect, I'll never forget, I had a friend during my incarceration who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and uh, he would seek out medical attention in the prison, but because it was so often, they threatened him with a charge called malingering. And I had to look it up in the dictionary. I never looked this, didn't know what this term meant, but malingering is feigning either pain or a medical condition for an ulterior motive. And so they were accusing him of faking his disability or faking his pain to be able to get pain meds to get high. And I'm sure this is a common trend in all prison systems because according to prison personnel, every incarcerated folk is a drug addict and they're all trying to get high all the time. Myself, when I became incarcerated, I still had the ability to walk with braces and regular therapy and canes in both hands. And the first thing they did when I became incarcerated was strip my wheelchair away, my braces, and my cane away. Because of the metal construction, they said, this is a security risk. We can't allow you to have this. And they gave me a prison wheelchair that was soldered up. So the foot pedals were not removable, the armrest, basically like a hospital chair. And if anybody knows anything about disability, durable medical equipment is designed for that specific person's body, their height, their weight. And so being stripped away of my wheelchair, my braces, and my cane, and being given a hospital chair, it was like giving somebody with a size 8 shoe, size 15 shoes, and saying, okay, go run a mile now in these big old shoes. And what I didn't know at the time was that if I did not receive regular therapy, if I did not walk with my braces, I would lose the ability to walk. And that's exactly what happened during my 16 years of incarceration because I was refused therapy, because I was refused my leg braces due to the metal construction. My legs atrophied, or the muscles in my legs atrophied. And when I came home, I saw an orthopedic surgeon and I said, I want to get back on my feet and I want to walk. The doctor had to be the bearer of bad news to say, I'm sorry, your legs are atrophied. They're past the point of no return. You lost the ability to walk about 4 years into your prison sentence. And so, unfortunately, medical neglect really resonates with me. I've seen it time and time again in California's prison system, and it's unfortunate. And something that I wanted to address, I wanted to acknowledge is that when you compound disability, race, ethnicity, but then also gender, right? I want to speak to the fact that we don't have any female representation or non-binary representation on this panel right now, and their experiences are different as well. And so I wanted to speak to that and to acknowledge that the experiences of Carl, Charles, myself can be drastically different for a non-binary person or for a female incarcerated person with a disability.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate you shouting out our peers who aren't present. You know, I don't believe that there is no such thing as people without voices. There is such a thing as silenced voices, muffled voices. And so, you know, we don't speak for people who we don't have to. We certainly amplify voices when we can. I appreciate you amplifying that in that moment. I wanted to take a moment because I know we're about coming up on time, but it certainly was a good question in the chat that got lifted up. And so I wanted to speak to the fact that I spoke about there being a white lens to this and the research aspect of that. And I wanted to put a little clarity on that. And I certainly wanted to put some examples out there of where I was coming from with that. Because one, we know with the medical system, how it was designed, the way with which it was designed, and it was designed with a particular standard of person in mind. A lot of those examples, and I'm gonna go straight to an example for those who love sports, the NFL, the whole concussion debate when that happened, when we talked about that, one of the things that was lifted up was that there was a different scale for people of color than there was for white athletes. And that measure was a lowering of the standard for a person's cognition, which meant that, which translated to mean that a person, their cognitive function was not as high as the average white athlete, which is a standard that they practice quietly. It was one of those things that showed up that when the lawsuit hit, it had to be brought to bear. So I'll throw that out there. The other thing is about like conditions are labeled differently, especially when it comes to darker skinned people. In medical texts, they still talk about that. I've met professional people who have come out of medical school who have said that there's still debates about whether or not black and brown people have a pain tolerance difference, and that still shows up in textbooks often. The other, and I want to throw out there a good book to read, Coded Bias is what it's called. And in the Coded Bias book, they talk so much about technology and how soap dispensers have a bias that, you know, they have a harder read on darker skin. Facial recognition softwares have a higher risk of false read for black and brown people. And that those are just things that show up in everyday life as the technology knows what it's doing, but the technology was coded by, written by people. And so it has bias written into the code itself. How do we tease those kinds of things out of the system? We acknowledge that they exist. We acknowledge that they existed from the beginning and that they are baked into certain institutions that we have to uncoil them from. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there because it was a great question. I appreciate him having the courage to share that and putting that on out there for us. All right. With on that note, we are coming up on time. I wanted to close us out with a particular question, and I wanted to make sure that it was stated for everybody who's listening right now. Like, what are the things that we can do that we can concentrate on to help people understand the intersectionality between these issues, between race and disability? And what are some one or two concrete steps, maybe actions, Mir, Charles, that people can take this year? That would be helpful for us all.
I can say something about that. I am very big on disability pride. I absolutely have embraced my identity as a person with a disability, and I believe, changing hearts and minds, allowing individuals to express that pride in being different. Um, Humans, we come in different variations. We just as much as our skin colors are different, our hair color, our eye color, so is our ability levels. And I feel that by instilling that thought that there's nothing wrong with having a disability, it should not be stigmatized, even in a Western culture, in an industrialized culture, in a modern culture as the United States. Disability is still stigmatized, both in the media, but also in everyday society and everyday life. And so I feel one step towards the right direction is approaching disability not from a deficit-based model, but from an asset-based model.
Yeah, I think what is needed is a lot more humanity, and humanizing, right? We tend to discard people who have particular challenges in whatever it is that our agenda is, right? And I just think that we need to get back to just humanizing people, man. Like these systems, they prioritize the system itself over the people they're supposed to serve. I think that's backwards. I think we need to get back to like people centered, be people centered, human centered in our values, man, as a society. How do we want to move forward? How do we want to look? I think this is a pivotal moment to really start taking a look at those questions and really doing some reflecting. But I think it's just humanizing. And I think we could all do something by starting with ourselves and how we respond to people with disabilities, how we treat people with disabilities, and how we exemplify that behavior. I think that's an important step. And I think it all starts with ourselves and yeah, just humanizing and doing some research and learning because a lot of it could come down to ignorance and lack of information, um, which also is something that, can be prevented with a little bit of more information and research. So thank you for everybody hosting this conference and raising the awareness on these issues. Because like I said earlier on, it's there's a lot more to be discovered when it comes to these disabilities because I heard a statistic that really shocked me that about I think it was you, Mir, who may have said it, and I may get the percentage wrong, but it's a high percentage, like 80 or 85% of disabilities are non-physical. So you can't even really see a disability most of the time. You know what I mean? So
Right.
that just goes to show how much more research needs to be done because if it's most of the disabilities are non-physical, how are they being diagnosed and acknowledged? And so I feel like those we could start there. I feel like that's a great start.
93%.
93, look at that. And
Yeah.
I went even
Oh man.
lower just to be safe, but
Right, right, indeed.
93% of disabilities are non-physical. Like you can't visibly see them physically. You know
Indeed.
what I mean? Like, wow.
Well, on that note, gentlemen, certainly want to say thank you, Charles Muir. Uh, these are some of the systematic ways that othering happens and hierarchies are built.
And this is how we are able to relegate people to the back and relegate them to the shadows. A lot of us, that is, come out of these scenarios that are in the shadows, and literally we're fighting for our lives, and we're fighting for our presence to be visible and be seen and be treated as human beings. So let's keep working on that and keep working on issues like this for exactly those reasons. On that note, I'll pass it back to Ben. Thank you for having us, Ben.